Welcome to Momentum Investing, property investing made easy. One of the world's top podcasts on property investing, bringing you the top experts in the field so you can learn firsthand what it takes to create passive income and take control over your financial future.
Hello, Momentum Investor, and welcome to the Momentum Investing Podcast. We have a very exciting show for you here today with Matthew Moody, the UK's top HMO expert. I want to start today's episode by thanking you for being a part of our community, for listening to this episode and subscribing to our podcast. After all, it's thanks to you that we can bring these amazing speakers onto these episodes and share their lessons with you. I also want to thank everyone who has sent in suggestions for speakers and questions that you want us to ask. We really appreciate it because our goal is to make sure you get the answers to your question. If you have a question or a speaker you would like to see, please go to our Instagram channel. It's Momentum Property Education, and just comment on one of the photos. That's the easiest way to get a hold of us, and we'll see it and we'll make sure to do our best to accommodate your wishes. So today's episode is going to be really exciting. We're talking to Matthew Moody, who has over 17 years of property experience. He has a property portfolio worth over £3.5 million, and his letting agency handles over 1,000 units. He's actually won Letting Agent of the Year. In addition, he has sourced over £25 million worth of properties, and in 2011 and 2010 alone, he sourced over £16.5 million. In the episode, he shows you how. He'll teach you about the best practices around HMOs. He'll show you the best practices for running them, what it takes to become a successful investor, and how to find tenants in a time like this when you can't even do viewings. So he's going to teach you how to reduce your voids and build a successful portfolio. So stay tuned, and make sure you stay tuned to the very end because Matthew has an exciting surprise for you as a wrap up. So welcome to this episode and have fun. All right, so welcome to the Momentum Investing Podcast. We're here today with the HMO expert, Matthew Moody. So
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, you've got so much experience. You are, at least in my opinion here, probably the top expert in the UK when it comes to HMOs. You've got over 17 years of experience. The guys, everyone heard the introduction, so they know what you can do. Obviously, a lot of our listeners are at different levels. So I thought we'd just start with, really, what is an HMO? Can you share what is an HMO? What do you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a HMO, I think at its basic level is utilizing an asset and effectively renting it out by the room, as opposed to renting it out to a single family. So you could have a HMO with just 3 rooms, right up to 10, 14, even 15 bed type of properties. Typically a HMO though is probably about 5 or 6 rooms, and the title HMO stands for Houses of Multiple Occupation, which is just a horrible government term that they gave it, just to kind of put it into a little category all of its own.
Yeah, well, I know a lot of people, they look at and they start with buy-to-lets, buying a property, renting it to a family. Obviously, you and a lot of your students take a completely different route, really go into the HMOs. So what would you say is like the benefit of an HMO compared to a buy-to-let or another strategy?
I think the major benefit is cash flow. Always has been, always will be. It's the fact that you can take a property and effectively triple or quadruple the amount of cash that you can make from it, whilst at the same time providing really, really nice accommodation. So the types of properties we're talking about are not what people often think about, which is this kind of like, horrible little pokey rooms where people are just kind of living in there and they've got nothing to do. And, there's like really horrible communal areas. These properties are typically very nice, decent sized rooms, and people have access to bathrooms and kitchens and living rooms where they can actually go and obviously chill and hang out. But it is about cash flow, absolutely.
I mean, most people do chill and hang out in the bathroom, of course.
Of course, absolutely. It's got to be done, right? Yeah. But yeah, it's all about cash flow. It's cash flow, cash flow, cash flow.
Well, what I love about the UK, or what intrigues me about the UK, is just the big cultural difference. Because obviously I'm in Sweden here, and most students would gladly live in an HMO. I mean, that's fun, it's hip, it's, you're living with your buddies. But professionals would in Sweden probably never live in an HMO, but I run a couple HMOs in the UK, and all of them are, I got doctors, I got nurses, I got lawyers, I got accountants, I got an IT consultant. I mean, I have super professional, well-paid people, and they live in an HMO. And I find that very interesting. And it's kind of like you say, it's not about quality living. But what have you seen with that? Has that developed over time, or has that just been a cultural thing forever in the UK? It's something you do.
I wouldn't say it's necessarily been forever, but I mean, I started doing this in 2003, and certainly I would say the type of tenant has changed over that, 17, 18 years or whatever it is. But in terms of the types of people that are looking, the reason really they're looking, I believe, is because typically an HMO is slightly easier to get into. I'll make no bones about it. We do reference checks, of course, but it is slightly easier to get into than, let's say, a flat or a house. The referencing on those are a lot more stringent. The second thing is it's all inclusive typically. So, someone going into one of those properties knows if they're paying £450 or £500 a month or whatever it is, that's it. That's going to cover their gas, their electric, their TV, their Wi-Fi, like literally everything. So all they've got to do
tax and all these other shocking things that come up.
All they've got to do is pay for their, going out, entertainment, travel, and whatever else they spend the money on.
Yeah. Cool. So, I mean, really, I agree. The big benefit of an HMO, that is, getting that great cash flow. And I've aimed a lot at more the professional lets myself. I know you've done a lot of student lets as well. What have you seen there? What is the benefits, the drawbacks of a student let compared to maybe a professional let?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, over the time period of managing HMOs, we've managed literally everything from LHA to students to professionals to key workers to the real high-end stuff. And I think student HMOs still work really well. And the reason they work really well typically is because normally, if you set it up in the right way, the guarantors alone generally earn 3 to 4 times the amount of rent that the students are paying per year. Yeah. So that means that in essence, there is really very little risk in that model. The only kind of downside to it, which is why, I personally don't really do a lot of student HMOs myself, mine are professional lets like yours, is you've got this 6 to 8 week downtime where there is typically no rent coming in or half rent coming in. So that kind of impacts the model a little bit from my point of view, hence why I prefer the professional route. But student market is still very healthy and buoyant. And certainly, if you go into that market, you are going to have literally a guaranteed 10 to 10 and a half months rent coming in.
Yeah. Well, a friend of mine always talks about as well about how you have to furnish them a little differently. With the professional lets, you can have like the nice glass tables and the nice looking things and just the towel racks in the bathroom. He's like, well, for some reason, students think anything that is a towel rack is to be hung on and swung from and kind of rips out half the wall. Has that been your experience? I mean, obviously you've run a letting agency as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes and no. I think because we're in a situation now where most students are having to have guarantors, and most students are paying a deposit and they have guarantors, it happens less often than you'd think. I think there are still issues, particularly with young men more, where they get a little bit boisterous, let's say, after a few drinks, and those things do happen. But typically, it's been pretty good. Tap wood. I'm not even sure if this desk is wood, but I'll tap it anyhow.
Well, you have me on the call. I mean, I am Daniel Wood, so we're
there you go. We'll
get me once, and we're good.
Yeah, I'd say it does happen for sure, but it doesn't happen as much as you would think it would. I'd say what probably happens more is just people not cleaning their room. If we're getting down to brass tacks on, some of the issues that do go on in HMOs, it's people live like pigs. And I don't get it. And, because our tradesmen are often in and out of rooms, I mean, not all the time, but if they've got to go and fix a repair, they'll see that and report it back to us, and we'll get on top of it with the tenant and say, what is going on? We've just delivered a new bed, and, there's stuff everywhere. There's like half-eaten bits of whatever, and it's just horrible.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, I guess that's why they're living in an HMO and not a house.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah. So I mean, I know a lot of people, I mean, like we love the HMO model. I mean, one of the things we teach our listeners and our students, I mean, we teach them what we call the momentum investing model, how you build cash flow and how you over time build that capital growth. So it becomes like a snowball that just rolls and gets bigger and bigger, where obviously, as you say, when you can double, triple, quadruple the cash flow from a property by switching to the HMO strategy, it's huge.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of people who don't like HMOs. And what would you say are like what the common things you hear? Why would you not do an HMO? And what would you say to that?
I think it depends on two routes. Are you managing it or not? And that's a really important question, right? And I guess for your guys being international investors, probably most of them are not going to be managing it. So it becomes less of an issue. But if you are managing it yourself, there's certainly more work involved. But I kind of figure at it from the point of view of, I always look at a HMO as a number of single lets that just happen to be in the same building. And if you look at it from that point of view, you have to think, well, okay, let's say I had 5 separate flats. How much work and effort would I be putting into those on a monthly basis? Versus, say, 5 rooms in a house, how much effort would I be putting into them on a monthly basis? And the effort isn't really that much more. And if you set up your systems and processes right, actually, you might be spending a couple of hours a week, let's say, managing your HMO. But in reality, people perceive there to be lots of hassle, and there is some hassle, but there's less than people think. And I think the main hassles that people get worried about is the fact that people aren't going to pay the rent. Well, you can argue that about any rental property. There are going to be issues with the tenants, and yes, there are. And that's just a case of HMO landlord has to be more of a social worker and counsellor than, let's say, other landlords. And probably the other one which people often think about is going to be more damage caused. And yes, there is definitely higher maintenance, but that's just because of wear and tear mainly. It's not really because people are deliberately damaging things. It just doesn't happen. So yeah, I can understand why people are put off by it. But at the same time, I think it all depends on what you are investing for. If you're investing for, let's say, long-term pension, buy single-let properties all day long because they're going to be good as gold and just run through and create some income for you. But ultimately, it's going to be capital appreciation, right? But HMO, you get both. You get cash flow and capital appreciation.
And as you say, a lot of the problems go away if you just get yourself a good letting agent who takes all that hassle off your hands.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's another thing that people have kind of issues with about, I'm going to get an agent, they're going to cost me a lot of money. Well, yes and no, because they're going to cost you 10 or 12%. That's 10 or 12% that you wouldn't have had anyhow had you gone down, let's say, a single let route. And you're probably going to be ending up spending maybe a little bit more on HMO to get it going, but not that much more really. And you end up with much more cash flow ultimately at the end of the day.
No, I love it. I love our HMOs. But I love what you said about, if you have the right system. So I thought, how about we get into a little like the do's and don'ts around an HMO? What should you be doing? What should you think about? And what are common mistakes you need to avoid?
So probably one of the most common mistakes people make from HMOs is buying the wrong HMO.
Right. Yeah. Good start.
And I think that comes down to really not understanding research and location. There's a lot of, I think the market has changed significantly over the last, 15 or so years. Back in the, let's call them the noughties, it was a lot easier to get finance. There was a lot more lenders on the market, and it was possible to effectively buy at a discount and refinance later on the same day. And there was a lot of people doing that, and thus they were buying single let stock because you could get discounts, and you can still get discounts today. It's just people were focusing on that a lot more. And because of that, what that's almost kind of led to is the fact that people were just buying stuff because it was a deal. And they weren't buying stuff because actually it's the right location and it's got the right target demographic. So I think one issue I see all the time is people will buy stuff, certainly from, let's say, sources who say it's a HMO or it could be a HMO, that type of thing, not really knowing that actually, yes, it could be. Any house can be a HMO, really, but it is about location. So location is one thing I find people do mess up a lot. And it's not entirely down to their fault. They are sometimes led by people that they perceive as experts saying, this is really good, when actually they're selling a deal, right? And that really does impact people a lot. I think the second one, moving on from buying the wrong HMO in the wrong location is you would not believe the amount of voids that people have in HMOs that literally we just sit there as I say, a managing agent and just think, what are you doing? And particularly when we go to say some of the landlord type meetings, such as the NLA or what is now the NRLA, it's a bit of a mouthful, but the landlord organisations, and these people there that are old school landlords, been doing it 20 years, and you get talking to them and said, how's it going? It's like, I've got a lot of voids right now. So, right, what have you got? It's like, I've got 8 voids. Like, okay, would you like to find some tenants? Oh, no, we don't want to pay for that. And it's kind of like, well, if you have another void for another month, then that's more money that you've lost through not filling that property up versus, let's say there's 50% or 60% or whatever we charge to get that property filled. But there's certainly a lot more voids in HMOs than people think. And I think the other big one is, and I know that when I was in Sweden talking to your guys, I kind of ram this home a lot, is whenever you see a deal presented, and there's lots of deals presented, always be aware that what they tell you the deal is generally not the deal, particularly when it comes to bills. And bills is one of those things which cannot be underestimated. It just cannot be. And as a very minimum, I always allow £100 per month per tenant for bills, and that is a minimum. In essence, and we're just doing analysis right now on some of my portfolio and also some of our landlords, the actual current number is a little bit higher than that. So it's just one of those things that people have to take into account in terms of you've got all this lovely money coming in, and you might be making 2,600 whatever from one property, but you still have to pay bills. You still have to pay the mortgage, and there's a lot of things that come off that. So yeah, I just say to people, always be aware of, yes, you can make really great money from HMOs, 100%, but you still have to run them, and you still have to pay those bills as well.
Well, if we get into the details of that, that's a great answer. Let's talk about what makes an area good. So if one of our listeners here gets an HMO sent to them here tomorrow, what should they be looking at in the area to make sure that they're not, they don't get the wool pulled over their eyes by a evil sourcing agent trying to sell them a deal?
Great question. And given that I do a module on this, which is like about 2 hours long, I'm not sure I'm going to be answering it very quickly. However, I'll do my best to give you a few nuggets. I'd say the key thing really is, and I say this to everybody, is do your own research, do your own due diligence. And I know this is something that you guys do all the time. It's really digging down into the details and understanding, is this really a deal? Is this a deal? And is this location actually a location that does make sense? And you can only do that through going into the detail of what's going on in that area, what is the demand like, what are the house prices like. And I always come at it from the perspective of find the location first, then find the deal. And I know a lot of people disagree with me on that and just say find a deal first. But I kind of say, no, you should go and find the location first and then go deep into that location, because deals are out there every single day. They're everywhere. And once you know a location really well, you can really go to town on that location. You can build up economies of scale. You can build up local contacts. And, again, I say this to all of my clients is, if you have one HMO, how much do you think the letting agent is going to put effort into that versus, let's say you have 5 HMOs? The difference is just huge, because someone that has 5 HMOs is a big landlord, because most landlords just own one property, right? So the more you have in an area and the more you have with one agent, the more they're going to look after you, for sure. So it just comes down to this whole thing around, in order not to have the wool pulled over your eyes, as you said, I think it is doing your due diligence. It is understanding, is that market price that I'm being given correct? Are the prices I'm being told for rooms actually correct, or are they a bit high? Are the bills correct? Because most often than not, they're completely inaccurate.
The average take 15% MO or monthly operating expenses. We always use much higher, of course, as you say. I usually recommend 20 to 25% rather than the classic 15.
Yeah. So I think if you do all of that, you're going to be in a much better position to make a decision. And it's that whole thing about knowledge and experience. And I think if everybody just went down that route of really trying to find locations, and look, I get it that locations are difficult, and obviously with overseas investors coming into the UK, it's even more difficult because it's like, well, everywhere kind of works. I remember I did some analysis back in, this would have been 06, 07. We did the entire country. We analysed the entire country for HMO demand. And it was interesting because we collated this over a period of a month, and the demand was immense. And what it showed is two things. It showed, one, you could rent out a room anywhere in the country for £100 per week easily. So £433 per month, not a problem. The second thing it indicated is there was little pockets of areas that had much higher demand than others. But in essence, some of those areas were geared and positioned because of industries around them. And obviously industries come and go, as we see, literally right now. They come and go all the time. They change. So that's not a precursor to saying, well, that area is going to work forevermore. Because what was interesting when we did all this analysis is the number one area in the country for HMOs, and you'll never guess where it is. It was Didcot.
Well, of course. I mean, that was instantly my thought. Of course.
Outside of Oxford, no one has ever heard of it. And the reason why that had such high demand is because they have and still have a massive power plant there. A lot of people looking for jobs in that particular area because there is nowhere to live. It's just Didcot and that's it. And Didcot's not a large town. So if you had a HMO in there at that time, the power plant's since closed down and changed. So it's not like that anymore. But this is why I say that anywhere has demand. It's just how much demand does it have? And is it enough demand?
That's a good point, though, you make, that was at the time the best, but it was all based on one power plant. So now that closed, obviously everyone who went in and bought HMOs there are going like, uh-oh, what now? And that's an important part as well. You've got to be looking at the long-term health. And I can say my co-host, Gisela and Lucas, will love what you talked about with the due diligence and the numbers. That's their thing. Because that's really getting into it. And I like what you say about choosing your area. We usually teach it a little differently to internationals, but it's the same kind of principle. I mean, for a British investor, choose your area, get there, go there, visit there, meet the people. The way we look at it for internationals is it's about the people. So it's, you recruit the best possible people, and then that will tell you what areas. And then once you know which areas, you have good contacts in, then you go after a deal. So deal comes after, partner, area, deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, obviously it's slightly different, investing from overseas. I completely understand that. And it is important to find the right partners on the ground. Saying that, though, I think anybody can do desktop research from anywhere in the world. Oh, yeah. So you can, again, just re-verify and recheck everything that's been said to you.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So I want to get into a bit of your background and story and what you've done. I mean, one of the things that I think a lot of people would like to know was in a period of 2 years, you were able to source over £16.5 million worth of properties. How does someone go about doing that? How did you do that?
So this was effectively driven by a couple of things. The first thing was that at that time, lending was not really available. So we decided to really focus on what are the options outside of lending. And for us, there were a version of what you would classify as lease options, long-term leases, delayed exchange with completions, and rent-to-rent type properties.
Right.
And I think effectively some of it comes down to a kind of concept that's very in vogue right now, but we were doing 10, 11 years ago, which was rather than thinking small, thinking really big.
Yeah.
And you see this all the time now, think big, and there's 10x this and that, all that kind of stuff. And we were kind of doing this back in the day, which was people were going after one deal at a time. And that's fine, and you can obviously make money from that. But at the time I was working with a couple of business partners, and we thought, well, why don't we go after portfolios?
Mm.
And the reason we can't afford that is because it's not really that much effort. And we were looking at, say, 2 or 3 units. And what effectively happened is the way we started on this journey is we went to see a dilapidated building, which was a 16 bed building that had been shut down. The reason being shut down is the landlord didn't like his tenants. They're all druggies. They're all like kind of borderline,
Mm.
on the edge, weren't paying the rent. And he decided to remove the fire alarm panel in front of the fire officer and the council person responsible for housing. So they shut him down, and he came to us and said, look, I need to get rid of this property. Do you want it? And it was a good property, but so much work involved. It was literally like, you see these American cop dramas and there's like drugs everywhere and clothes strewn, and like, you don't know if there's a body in the corner. You're not really sure. There's a very, it's just horrible. Yeah. So we went to this property, and it's just, this is going to cost so much money. And the deal that was presented just didn't work for us. But he happened to call me back a few weeks later and said, look, I haven't got rid of this property yet. And I thought, well, yeah, we're not surprised. He said, but I've got another 9 properties. Would you like them? So it's like, that sounds good.
Yeah.
So effectively, we started off with a 9 property deal, which equated to 44 units in terms of HMO units, some flats, but mainly HMO rooms. And that was worth, I think, 1.4, 1.6 million, something like that at that time. And we kind of thought, well, hey, if we can do this once, why don't we just repeat that model?
Yeah.
So the way we went about doing that was just reaching out to our contacts, networking with people that we knew could potentially have access to those types of people. And we started getting leads coming in. So, we did a 3-unit deal in Leeds. We did a 15-unit deal in Lincoln, which was about 60-odd units. And then we did a massive, massive deal in Essex, and that was 120 units,
Wow.
which is where the bulk of that kind of 16.5 million came from, because it was a massive deal. But it was really just about thinking, well, how do you think much bigger than you are? And rather than just doing a deal for one deal, do it on a portfolio, because it's exactly the same due diligence, exactly the same work. It's just bigger numbers.
And what's exciting to me about it as well, I mean, that's what we focus on purely today, is looking at portfolios. But one thing I've noticed is, for example, that initial property, it was a large property. Yes, it was in bad shape, but it's a big property. So it's going to have a pretty big price tag, which means usually a pretty high stamp duty. What's nice when you do like multi purchases, I mean, a portfolio purchase, is it caps your stamp duty percentage. And you're actually saving stamp duty on the more expensive purchases by doing it.
Absolutely. And the ironic thing about that first initial property is we couldn't agree a deal with the guy, and he was paying $1,850 a month in mortgage on a property that had been vacant for a year. And we went and met with the bank, which was, I believe, Allied Irish Bank in Coventry, presented a business plan of how we take over the property, do it up, basically get it on its knees and refinance it. They said no. 18 months later, we purchased that property at auction for one of our clients for £150,000 less than the owner owed on that property, because they said no to us. Yeah. And, I felt sorry for the guy, but the guy did abscond. He's elsewhere now, overseas. Let's put it that way.
All right. Well, that happens too.
These things do happen, but it was ironic. And you're completely right that, the bigger numbers, you do have some benefits from that. And I think the second thing that came in line with that as well is the fact that we already had a really good system. So, but at the time when we took over the first portfolio, I had about 50 properties that I was managing, including my own properties. And we already had a really good system that was working. And we spent a little bit of time, and not that long, just improving that system and moving it from what we were using at the time to a thorough, robust letting system. And essentially that meant that we could just upload these properties overnight, and everything would be live the next day. All of the tenants in there, the rental payments due, everything.
Nice.
So the system part of it was really important too, because I think sometimes people get a little bit scared about, I want to do something big, but I'm not sure, have I got anything that's going to back it up in the background?
Yeah, and that's an important part. Otherwise, I mean, that's the two reasons most businesses fail is either they grow too slow, basically, they can't afford to survive, or they grow too fast and their systems explode.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things I think a lot of people are asking, and we actually got some questions about this prior to this podcast, was how do you get tenants? This actually came up yesterday on our mastermind. So we have our little mastermind group where we're supporting our higher level students. And one of the questions they had, a lot of them were looking at buying HMOs because obviously with the global pandemic going on, there's a lot of great deals out there, but their worry was, how do I now find tenants because we can't do viewings? And so how would you, I mean, you've won letting agent of the year, so you know one or two things about letting. How would our listeners, our students, our people, how would they go about finding tenants when you can't do viewings?
It's a really good question. And I think because we're in a situation where there is mass uncertainty, really, and everything is extremely unclear, I can't really give you a very clear answer, but I'll give you some tips. So I think the first thing is the industry as a whole has obviously just effectively stopped it all intents and purposes. So whilst it is still possible to find tenants, what's more challenging is find tenants to do viewings on. So uh, demand has dropped off a cliff, literally just reduced by about 80%, but there are still people looking. And what I'd say is for the people that are looking, typically what we would do for a viewing is we'd effectively, make sure that the property was as hygienic as possible beforehand, which we're not sending cleaners in right now. So this is down to just a visual inspection, but also checking in with the tenants as to, are any of you ill?
Yeah.
Because if they are, we probably just wouldn't do a viewing.
No.
And if they're not, then effectively how we would manage that viewing is we'd make sure the room was open, whichever room that was, and we'd effectively just invite the person in. So we wouldn't even take them round. We'd just stand outside, social distance and all that nonsense, which is another thing entirely, but anyhow, and we'd just let them walk around themselves, and they can basically just see themselves what it is and whether they're interested or not. I'd say at the moment, the main demand is coming from workers that are in some way or shape or form some type of key worker, particularly NHS workers. That's probably where most of the demand is still coming from. And we have a few properties that are very near hospitals where we're getting inquiries for those. But apart from that, the inquiries are very much down. But, we are still moving people in. And again, we're just doing that at a distance and kind of managing through that. But I think also because a lot of people have stopped, now's a good time to be proactive as well. So one of the things that we will do is chase up people before they even think about contacting us. So obviously on a lot of the portals, you can just chase people anyhow and you can reach out to them. You can do sponsored adverts, pay-per-click adverts, and you can really, try and get a little bit of a buzz going. But ultimately, you still have to be aware of the fact that the demand is 80% roughly less than it was. So it will take longer, but you may be able to fill those properties up, of course.
Yeah, and the good thing right now, I mean, it's important to have that in the calculation because obviously, as you say, it will take longer time, so you might have some dragging costs. But considering the few amount of deals that are going through, the ones that do, the seller usually they need to sell, so the deals coming around right now are pretty amazing. So I think for those who have the ability to go out and purchase right now, do deals, and have the patience to get a tenant in there, are in amazing shape.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, it's just about having realistic expectations. If you thought it was going to take 2 or 3 weeks to fill out a property, it could take 6 to 8 weeks, but it will fill up for sure. If you've bought in the right location, though, right?
And did your due diligence, ran your numbers. Yeah. So that's awesome. So let's leave our listeners with something great from you. Do you have a great tip, a advice, something to think about, something you want to leave them with as a takeaway?
I think the key thing I would say to everybody is that it is possible for anybody, I firmly believe, to what I call retire in 3 to 5 years. And by that, I mean have all of your bills paid and not have to worry about money again. And obviously, real estate for me is the best way of doing that. And for me, in real estate, HMOs are the best way of doing that. There are other strategies you can use as well. And you may have to use some of those to get to HMOs. But I think it's just really having a plan and looking at how you're going to enact that plan and how you're going to do something little towards that plan every single day. Because if you keep coming back to that plan and you keep that plan in the top of your head and that's what you're focused on, then you could well still be working for the man, let's call it, for the next 3-4 years. But it doesn't matter because they're paying your way to building up an asset base of something that in 3 to 5 years' time will basically pay all of your bills. And then it's a case of, well, do you still enjoy doing what it is you're doing, whether you are working for someone else or you have your own business? And if you do, then why not just keep on doing that and then reinvesting those assets into making something even bigger? So I think that is a really key one that I would say to people. And I think coupled with that is the fact that if you can prolong spending the money, and what do I mean by that? It's really often people get a deal and the money starts coming in and then they start spending the money. Now, if you can just kind of say, look, I'm going to live as frugally as possible for the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years, which ain't that long a time, right? And just reinvest all of those profits back into the business. By the end of 3 to 5 years, you could be at a stage of earning 80 to 100K per year income from your property portfolio easily, which is going to be way more than most people need. Yeah. And then you have some real choice and freedom.
I love that. Yeah, and that's exactly what we love talking about, is having that patience to let the momentum build itself, reinvest, get the capital appreciation, maybe refinance and buy more, and just build that portfolio over a period of 3 to 5. I mean, even if it takes 10 years, if you don't do it, what will you be doing in 10 years? You'll still be at your job. So absolutely. And I love that. And it really comes back to just what is now the definition of safe and secure, right? I mean, we've always said safe and secure, or people always said, is get a job and work that job. But today we're kind of seeing that, those who have passive income in a time like this are the ones who are safe and secure, because job security, has kind of disappeared. So if anyone wants to talk to you, connect with you, learn more from you, Matthew, how can they reach you? What is the best way?
So I'm on all of those social media platforms that you love to hate. So you can find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. Generally, it's Matthew J. Moody or Moody Matthew, one of the two. So you can grab me on there. We have a Facebook group, which is getting started in property investing, which we are about to do another challenge in shortly, which will be all about funding and finance. So that's always a good place to kind of hang out and just learn some new skills. Yeah. And a website perspective, I guess, if you're interested.
Sorry, Matthew, what's the name of the Facebook group? What's the name of the Facebook group? Someone wants to join?
Facebook group is Getting Started in Property Investing.
Getting Started in property investing. So everyone take a note of that. Join. Matthew's going to show you how to find money, which we all.
Absolutely.
What's your website? Where can they go?
The website is that we have two main websites for HMO specific stuff. It's yourhmoexpert.com. That's been running since 2006. It's got a lot of free stuff on there, interviews, podcasts, articles, all kinds of manner stuff, and freebies. And then League of Extraordinary Investors is my main site at the moment, which is where we do everything for the league in terms of our membership and coaching and all of our client work through there.
I love that. A lot of our students are loving the league, so that is huge value. The League of Extraordinary Investors, or just go to your HMO Expert, get more info. Thank you so much for joining us, Matthew. This was an incredible episode. I know how much we appreciate it here at Momentum Investing. I know how much our listeners appreciate you spending this time. So thank you, and we'll obviously talk again soon.
Thanks a lot. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. We hope you got a lot of value out of it and can take from this interview with Matthew how to best invest in HMOs, what to do, what to avoid, how to think about working with different tenants, different strategies, different areas, and of course, what to do in these times when it might be hard to do viewings, how to still handle the overall situation. You'll really want to stay tuned for the next episode. We're interviewing Richard Shepard, who will be talking about lease options. Richard is one of the top lease option strategists in the UK, and he'll be sharing how you can start doing lease options, the best tips and tricks of the trade, as well as his 4 ways you can increase value in properties. Most people only think about one, and he's going to share all 4, which will be very, very powerful. In addition, he's going to share his prediction of how he believes the entire financial system as we now have it will collapse in the coming years, and what you can do to position yourself to be ready for the new coming. So it's a very exciting episode, so make sure to subscribe to the Momentum Investing podcast so you get a notification as soon as possible as soon as it comes out. We would also like to ask you a favor. We'd like to ask that you give us a 5-star rating on iTunes or whatever service you're using. That way it helps us reach more people and get the word out and get these very important lessons out to as many people as possible. So we really appreciate that support. Again, thank you for listening, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.